The house was quiet that evening, the kind of quiet I usually welcomed after a long day at the office. I had kicked off my heels by the front door, set my leather bag down by the couch, and poured myself a glass of water before collapsing into the chair I always thought of as mine. The television hummed faintly in the background, an old rerun I wasn't paying attention to. I flipped through a small pile of mail I had left unopened on the coffee table, a few bills, some junk advertisements, and one envelope with gold trim that immediately caught my eye. I knew what it was before I even opened it. My brother's wedding invitation. I turned it over slowly, tracing the embossed lettering on the back flap. For a second, I thought of how it would feel to walk into that venue, to watch him celebrated like the centerpiece of our family's pride. I peeled it open and slid the card out, my breath steady, until my eyes landed on the printed names. I froze. My name wasn't there. Instead, there was a placeholder. Guest. Just that. No Loretta, no Connolly, not even a misspelling to give me the comfort of a mistake. Just absence. I held the card under the lamp and blinked hard, convinced I had overlooked it. But the truth glared back at me from the paper. The devil is in the details, they say, and this detail felt like a knife's edge across my chest. Maybe it was a printing error, I whispered out loud, though there was no one to hear me. Yet even as I said it, a tightness grew in my stomach. I set the card back down on the table, but my hands trembled when I tried to smooth it flat. I sat there staring at it, the television buzzing behind me, the glass of water untouched. That invitation hadn't just arrived, it had delivered a message, and the message was clear. You don't count. I leaned back into the chair and closed my eyes, trying to reason with myself. Families mess things up all the time, don't they? Family is everything. I'd heard that phrase from my parents all my life. But if family was everything, why did I always feel like nothing when it came to them? I remembered being the youngest, the one who was expected to smile quietly in photographs, to let my brother take the spotlight. I remembered the birthdays that felt more like footnotes, and the Christmases when the presents with my name seemed more like afterthoughts. I rubbed the edge of the invitation between my thumb and forefinger and forced a laugh. It's just a typo, Loretta, I told myself, trying to make the words stick. You're overreacting. But my body told a different story. My throat tightened, my chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I could dismiss a misspelling, but not being listed at all. That didn't feel like a typo. It felt like erasure. I folded the card carefully, slipped it back into its golden envelope, and placed it on the table. My hands shook, even as I tried to pretend I was calm. That small detail, so small most people wouldn't have noticed, had cracked something open inside me that I could no longer ignore. The next morning, after a restless night staring at the ceiling, I made coffee and sat at my desk scrolling through my phone. A notification blinked from the event app my brother's fiancé had set up for the wedding. I clicked into it absent-mindedly, more curious than hopeful. The screen loaded a list of guest seating and dinner arrangements, row after row of names. Cousins, neighbors we hadn't spoken to in years, even business partners of my brother who'd never once set foot in our house. I scrolled slowly, reading carefully, waiting to see my name. But it wasn't there. Not in the VIP list, not in the seating chart, nowhere. I stared at the glowing screen, blinking as if the letters might rearrange themselves. My thumb hovered, scrolling back up and down again, looking for a name that didn't exist. So I'm invited, I muttered, but not included. The words landed heavy in the room. I set the phone down, the screen dimming as if embarrassed by what it had revealed. My reflection on the black glass looked back at me, lips pressed thin, eyes hard. I thought about what weddings often meant in families like ours. They were stages, grand showcases where favoritism, pride, and hierarchy became impossible to hide. You saw who got the spotlight, who got seated near the front, and who was shoved to the edges of the room. This wasn't just a mistake, it was a map. And on that map, I wasn't even a landmark. It's not about the seat at the table, I whispered. It's about whether they ever saw me at the table at all. The first trace of anger sparked under my skin, an anger that felt new, but also strangely overdue. I didn't call my mother, I didn't call my father. Outwardly, I kept calm. but inside, I was storming. "Don't make a scene!" I could hear my mother's voice in my head, the same voice that had dismissed my feelings since childhood. "Don't be dramatic." I swallowed the words I wanted to say, rehearsed them in silence, as though they were lines from a play I never got to perform. What I wanted to say was simple. I noticed, and I'm not invisible. But instead, I placed the invitation and the guest list printout into a folder, tucked it neatly into my desk drawer, and closed it with a decisive push. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about something far older, deeper, and sharper than that. This wasn't a typo. It was a warning sign. As the sun sank outside my window that night, painting the sky over Houston in streaks of orange and gray, I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap. I thought of my brother, of my parents, of all the dinners where I had been asked to stay quiet for the sake of harmony. For the first time, I realized the wedding wasn't just about them. It was about me being erased, step by step, from the story they wanted to tell. I looked at the folder on my desk, the envelope tucked inside. "I should have known," I said softly. "A missing name was never just a mistake." 2 days passed since the invitation incident, but the sting hadn't faded. I'd gone through my workdays with a forced smile, nodding in meetings, typing out emails, and pretending my mind wasn't elsewhere. By the time I got home that Thursday afternoon, I was drained. I dropped my purse by the entryway, slipped off my flats, and let out a sigh that felt heavy enough to sink the whole house. The phone rang before I even had a chance to pour a glass of water. The sound startled me, shrill, insistent. I glanced at the screen and froze when I saw the name, Mom. My thumb hovered, every instinct urging me to let it go to voicemail. Still, I pressed accept. "Hi, Mom," I said carefully. "Sweetheart," she replied, her voice sweetened to syrup. "Oh, honey, can we talk for just a minute?" Something about that tone prickled my nerves. It was the kind of sweetness that made you suspicious, like a pie baked too quickly, golden on top, but raw underneath. I braced myself. They say if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. She didn't waste time. "We've hit a little bump, darling. Nothing serious, just one of those silly banking delays. You know how these institutions can be. I was wondering, just for a few days, could we use your card? It would help us cover a small deposit until things clear up." I blinked. "My credit card?" "Yes, but only for a couple of days," she rushed to add. "You're always so reliable, Loretta. You've been such a blessing to this family. I don't know what we'd do without you." Her flattery was thick, layered like icing on a stale cake. I leaned against the counter, gripping the edge, my knuckles pale. "What kind of emergency are we talking about?" "Oh, don't sound so alarmed," she chuckled lightly. "It's nothing dramatic, just a deposit that couldn't wait. We'll pay it back immediately. You know what we always say, family takes care of family." That line. Always that line. It had been the motto of my childhood, recited to guilt me into chores, into silence, into sacrifice. I chewed on my lip, every fiber of me screaming to say no, but my exhaustion won. "Fine," I said softly. "But just a few days, Mom." "Of course, sweetheart. Thank you. We love you." And then she hung up, light as a feather, leaving me with the weight of a stone in my chest. 2 days later, on a Saturday morning, I was mowing my small lawn under the Texas sun. The humidity pressed against me like a damp blanket. Sweat ran down my temples as the mower roared and sputtered over uneven patches of grass. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost ignored it, but when I saw the number, an unknown business line, I answered, wiping my forehead with the back of my wrist. "Good morning. May I speak with Ms. Connolly?" "This is she." "This is Rachel from First National Bank. We're calling to confirm a charge on your account for $89,000. It was processed earlier this week for Oakdale Estate. Do you recognize this transaction?" The world seemed to tilt. My grip on the mower loosened. I nearly dropped the phone. "89,000? I repeated, barely managing to breathe. "Yes, ma'am. It appears to have been authorized under your credit line. Was this you?" My mind raced. Oakdale Estate. A wedding venue. My brother's wedding venue. "No," I said quickly. "At least, I didn't authorize anything like that. Are you certain? Yes, ma'am. The charge cleared without issue. If it wasn't you, we recommend filing a fraud claim. Fraud. The word echoed in my ears. But the truth sank in fast and heavy. This wasn't fraud. It wasn't a stranger. It was my parents. My family. I swallowed hard, forcing composure. Thank you, I murmured, cutting the call short. I shut off the mower, the sudden silence pressing against my eardrums. The air was thick, the sun blazing, and inside me a storm raged hotter still. My mother's gentle emergency hadn't been a few days of help. It was theft, wrapped in ribbons. I ran into the house, slammed the mower handle down, and grabbed my phone. My fingers shook as I dialed her number. Once, twice, straight to voicemail. I tried again. On the third ring, she answered. Her voice was casual, cheerful, as though she were sitting on the porch sipping lemonade. Oh, hi, sweetheart. How are you? I didn't bother with pleasantries. Did you use my credit card for the wedding deposit? There was a pause, then a sigh. Yes, but we meant to tell you. Things got busy. You meant to tell me? My voice cracked with disbelief. You didn't even ask me. She laughed softly as if I were being absurd. Of course we asked. You said yes, remember? Don't be dramatic. I nearly dropped the phone. I said yes to a short-term emergency, not $89,000 for a wedding. Oh, Loretta, she soothed. You're making this into something it's not. It's important for the family. For Maris. You know how special this is. Don't you want to support your brother on his big day? I pressed my palm to my forehead, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles ached. Mom, this isn't support. This is robbery. You didn't ask. You took. Her tone hardened. You've always been too sensitive. We raised you better than this. You should be grateful we even included you at all. The line went quiet after that, but the silence between us was louder than anything she could have said. I lowered the phone, staring at the credit card in my other hand. It glinted under the morning sun pouring through the kitchen window, mocking me. My whole body trembled. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't even the debt hanging like a noose around my neck. It was something deeper, sharper. They had taken the one thing I still believed I had left. My right to say no. I set the phone on the counter, staring until my reflection warped against the black screen. And if they thought I would stay quiet, I whispered, they were wrong. I told myself I was only dropping by, just to say hello, just to play the dutiful daughter on a Saturday afternoon. But the truth was, I needed to see something with my own eyes. After the phone call with my mother and the shock of that bank charge, my instincts screamed that what I had seen so far was just the surface. I parked outside the house I grew up in, the brick facade looking smaller than I remembered, and forced my legs up the steps. Inside, the smell of lemon polish clung to the air, and the living room looked like a staging area for an event planner. Catalogs, flower samples, and stacks of ribbon cluttered the coffee table. My mother's handwriting covered lists taped to the fridge, and right there, spread out on the sofa, was a thick photo book bound in cream leather. I picked it up. The first page was Maris holding a baseball bat, maybe 12 years old, my father's arm slung proudly around him. Flip, Maris on vacation, sandcastle half built, waves splashing his ankles. Flip, Maris blowing candles on a cake surrounded by cousins, page after page, his life unfolded, glossy and curated. But me, not a single photograph. I traced the edges of a picture I knew I should have been in. You can erase a face from a photo, I whispered, but you can't erase the memory of being there. Or maybe I was never meant to be there at all. It wasn't oversight, it was curation. This book wasn't a record of our family, it was a monument to him, and a deliberate act of erasure for me. In American families, we put photos on walls, line hallways with school portraits, wedding pictures, vacations, to show the story of who belongs. Looking at that album, the painful truth was undeniable. They were showing me who counted, and it wasn't me. Mom, I called toward the kitchen, my voice calm, too calm. She appeared, wiping her hands on a towel. Yes, honey? I held up the album. Why aren't there any photos of me? She blinked, then smiled with the same rehearsed sweetness she'd used on the phone. Oh, Loretta, the album is about Maris. Don't make this about you. Those words landed like a slap. The exact same rhythm as when she told me I'd already agreed to pay. Don't be dramatic. Don't make this about you. Do you hear yourself? I asked, my voice low. You've written me out of my own life. Her expression hardened. History is written by those who hold the pen, she said, as though quoting something profound. And this wedding is his moment. Let him have it. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I swallowed it back. Suppressed rage didn't vanish. It crystallized, sharp and cutting. That album represented more than just pictures. It was the story they chose to tell, and in that story, I was expendable. I closed it slowly, laid it back on the sofa, and forced myself to smile at her. Interesting perspective, I murmured, though inside, betrayal pressed heavier than money ever could. Later that night, back in my apartment, I scrolled through my phone in the dim glow of a single lamp. I thought I was done being shocked. Then a cousin posted something on social media, a screenshot of a group chat. I enlarged the image, my eyes locking on the title, Wedding Planning. Dozens of names filled the participants list. Aunts, uncles, second cousins, family friends, my brother, my parents, but not me. I scrolled through the captured conversation. One cousin, do you think Loretta will help with the catering bill? My mother's reply, she already agreed. Don't let her fool you. Then Maris chiming in, don't worry, Loretta will cave, she always does. My throat closed as though someone had gripped it. That single line hit harder than the $89,000 charge. I wasn't forgotten. I was excluded on purpose. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. Sometimes cruelty isn't in silence. It's in the deliberate creation of a space where you're left out, where jokes are cracked at your expense, and where your compliance is treated as inevitable. They weren't worried about me saying no, because they had already defined me as incapable of it. As I sat there, the pieces aligned in a way I could no longer ignore. The missing photos, the erased name on the invitation. The absence from that chat. It wasn't random, and it wasn't oversight. It was pattern. I whispered into the empty room. I thought the card charge was theft, but this is exile. Money, attention, recognition, all funneled to Maris. Every sacrifice I had made, every boundary I'd tried to set, absorbed and overwritten by the narrative that he was the light and I was the shadow. The realization wasn't just painful, it was clarifying. For the first time in years, I felt the outline of resolve forming. If they wanted me invisible, if they had spent a lifetime convincing me that silence was my role, then they had underestimated me, because silence can be broken. I closed the album once more in my mind, set my phone face down on the table, and pressed my palms together. If they want me invisible, I thought, maybe it's time they finally see me. And the next time they looked my way, it wouldn't be with silence. It would be with proof. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual, even though I knew every turn of that road by memory. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter with each mile, debating whether to confront them or just sit politely at dinner, pretending none of this had happened. The week had been heavy since the bank's call, and my heart had carried that weight into every sleepless night. By the time I pulled into their driveway, I could already see through the windows the familiar silhouettes of aunts, uncles, and cousins gathered inside. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread hit me as soon as I walked through the door. My mother was laughing in the kitchen, my father's voice carried from the dining room, and the hum of conversation filled the house. On the surface, it looked warm, welcoming, but as I stepped in, I noticed the quick glances, too quick, too rehearsed, relatives looking at me, then looking away, whispers dying on their lips when I passed. I knew rumors had already spread. In families, the silence isn't empty, I thought bitterly. It's loaded. I hung my coat over the same chair I'd used since childhood and forced a smile for the cousins who nodded stiffly. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the anticipation of a conversation I knew couldn't be avoided. Before dinner began, I slipped into the kitchen where my mother was arranging rolls into a basket. "Mom, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She turned with that too sweet smile, as if she'd been expecting this. "Of course, honey. What's on your mind?" I didn't waste time. "Did you use my card for the wedding? $89,000? Her smile didn't fade, but her eyes sharpened. "We asked, Loretta. You said yes. Stop being dramatic." I inhaled sharply. "No, you didn't ask me for that. You twisted my words. I agreed to help with an emergency. Not this." She set the basket down, her tone cooling. "After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Your father and I gave you everything, and now when your brother has his moment, you begrudge him joy." "This isn't about joy," I shot back, my pulse racing. "This is about respect. You took something that wasn't yours to take. You're rewriting the truth, and you know it." Her face hardened further. "You've always been ungrateful, always looking for reasons to separate yourself. We are family, family sacrifices." I stared at her, the words sticking in my throat, but I swallowed them down. I understood, standing there in that kitchen, that this wasn't about money. It was about control, ownership. My choices had never been mine in her eyes. Dinner began with loud conversation and clattering silverware. Plates of food circled the table, laughter rising in waves. I sat near the end, my appetite gone, my hands resting quietly in my lap. At one point, my uncle raised his glass. "You two have been so generous," he said, nodding at my parents. "Covering such a wedding, it's a blessing." I saw it coming before it happened. My mother's head tilted slightly, her lips curling. She leaned forward just enough for everyone to hear. "Well," she said, her voice light and dismissive, "Loretta isn't really involved. She's not that important in this wedding." The words sliced through the room. Forks paused mid-air. The laughter died. I froze, heat crawling up my neck, but I didn't flinch outwardly. I felt blood pounding in my ears, my body rigid with rage I could barely contain. A cousin glanced at me with pity. Another avoided my eyes altogether. The silence that followed was louder than any toast. That, I thought bitterly, was the moment she erased me. Not in private this time, but in front of everyone. In American families, shame delivered publicly isn't just a wound, it's a brand. It cements the narrative, and once it spreads, it sticks. I steadied my breathing. I wasn't going to give her the explosion she wanted. Instead, I let my voice cut through the silence, calm, controlled. "Funny," I said, leaning slightly toward her, "because the bank thought I was important enough to charge." Gasps spread across the table. Someone coughed to cover the sound. My father's jaw tightened, my mother's smile faltered, and Maris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother tried to recover quickly. "See? She exaggerates, always turning things into more than they are." But the shift had already happened. For the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible daughter at the table. I felt like the one holding a match to their carefully painted picture. Inside, something resolved itself. They wanted me erased. Instead, they had drawn the line for me, and I knew which side I stood on. Dinner stumbled forward after that, conversations muted, laughter forced. I pushed food around my plate, barely tasting it. My mind wasn't at that table anymore. If they were willing to lie so easily, I thought, then words weren't enough. I needed something stronger. I folded my napkin, set it neatly by my plate, and detached myself from the weight of their gazes. I was no longer a daughter trying to earn a place at the table. I was a woman preparing to collect proof, and proof was exactly what I was about to collect. I walked back into my parents' house the following Sunday, my body tense the moment I stepped through the doorway. The dinner in Chapter 4 still clung to me. My mother's public dismissal, the smirks and awkward glances from relatives, my father's silence that said everything without a word. This gathering felt no different. The same people, the same clinking of silverware, the same undercurrent of tension masked by forced politeness. The dining room was full, the long table laid out with roasted chicken, green beans, mashed potatoes, and pies cooling on the sideboard. Voices floated above the table, but every laugh sounded hollow. I could feel eyes on me, not openly hostile, but expectant, as if they were waiting to see whether I'd sit quietly again or speak up this time. I took my seat, unfolding my napkin and laying it across my lap. Cousin Sarah made small talk about her new job. Uncle Mark praised Maris's promotion. I nodded politely, but the heaviness in the room sat on my chest. Family dinners are supposed to be safe havens, a place where love is passed around with the roles, but in our family, they were battlegrounds, and reputation was the prize. I chewed silently, watching Maris soak in the attention as if it were his birthright. And then my father stood, holding his wineglass. The room hushed. He raised the glass high. To the Son who brought us light, who carries our family forward. The cheer was immediate. Applause, nods, smiles, glasses raised around the table. Maris leaned back in his chair, smug satisfaction painted across his face. I froze, fork hovering above my plate. My father's words rang in my ears, hollow but sharp. The Son who brought us light. If Maris was the light, then what did that make me? A shadow, a mistake. I scanned the room. Some relatives glanced at me, their eyes filled with pity, but their lips sealed tight. None of them would risk disrupting the story my father had so carefully scripted. In that moment, I understood the toast wasn't about celebration. It was about erasure. My chest tightened, but I kept my face still. Growing up, I had watched fathers like mine define pride by their sons' achievements, while daughters were treated as background figures. In that instant, I saw decades of that tradition crash into me like a wave. I placed my fork down, folded my hands neatly, and inhaled deeply. Interesting, I said, my voice carrying just enough to silence the murmurs. The room turned toward me. Because the bank called me about the $89,000 wedding deposit. I suppose shadows pay bills too. The air cracked. Silverware clattered to plates. A gasp escaped from somewhere down the table. Maris shifted in his seat, his smug expression faltering. My mother coughed loudly, trying to break the moment, while my father's face hardened into stone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. My words cut sharper than any shout could. I leaned back, meeting my father's glare with steady eyes. Inside, my pulse thundered, but outwardly I was calm, collected, even surgical. Around me, relatives stared into their plates, uncomfortable, unwilling to choose sides. Their silence was another form of betrayal, but I no longer expected anything different. Dinner ended on a strained note. Conversations splintered into awkward fragments, and laughter died quickly whenever I looked up. Plates were cleared, pie slices served, but no one tasted anything. When the meal finally ended, I excused myself, stepping into the hallway. That's when I felt a presence behind me. Maris. He leaned against the wall, his voice low but sharp. Don't make this bigger than it is. Just pay, and don't embarrass us. I turned to face him, my arms folded. You mean embarrass you, because I won't play the silent little sister anymore. His jaw tightened. You always had less. That's how it's always been. But this is my moment. Don't ruin it. I stared at him, studying the boy who had grown into a man convinced the world owed him center stage. You think my silence is your entitlement? That every time I step aside, it confirms your greatness? He scoffed. Loretta, it's a wedding. Don't turn this into a crusade. A crusade? I let out a small laugh, bitter. This isn't about a wedding, Maris. It's about every year I was told to step back. Every time my contributions were erased. Every photo I was cropped out of. You've mistaken my quiet for weakness. His eyes flickered, just for a second, betraying uncertainty. But then he straightened, smirking. You won't follow through. You never do. I leaned in slightly, my voice steel. Watch me. I walked away, my hands trembling, but my voice steady. Inside, I could feel anger crystallizing into something sharper, resolve. They mistook my silence for weakness, I told myself. They forgot silence can also be strategy, and I was done being quiet. The rehearsal dinner fell on a sticky summer evening, Houston air pressing against my skin like a weight. I pulled into the parking lot of the banquet hall and sat in the car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My chest tightened, and for a split second I considered driving home. But that would have been surrender, and I'd already promised myself I was done with silence. Inside, the hall was decorated with white linens, tall vases filled with roses, and chandeliers casting soft light across the tables. Staff bustled with trays of glasses, the clatter of dishes mixing with laughter from the main dining area. I spotted the name card placed for me and almost laughed out loud. They had seated me near the kitchen doors, close enough to feel the draft every time they swung open. My brother sat in the center, surrounded by family and friends, his fiancée glowing beside him. I slipped into my chair, trying to ignore the sting. Then a hand tapped my shoulder. A woman in her 40s, dressed in sequins, smiled without really looking at me. "Excuse me," she said, pointing at her empty glass. "Could you bring more water?" I blinked. "I'm not staff." Her face flushed. Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I thought—" Her voice trailed off. I smiled politely, but inside I thought, they couldn't have placed me closer to the kitchen if they tried. My table, my position, it was all a mirror of how my family saw me. Not a guest of honor, not even a guest. Just someone filling space at the edge. The rest of the meal moved in a blur. I corrected the woman gently, but the humiliation lingered like a stain I couldn't scrub out. Across the room, Maris laughed, his shoulders thrown back, the entire circle leaning toward him like sunflowers chasing the light. My parents beamed. Pride etched across their faces as if he had built this empire himself. I picked at my food, staring at the seat cards lined up neatly. Weddings have a way of showing hierarchy. Who matters, who doesn't. And here, in this room, I was either invisible or disposable. A cousin leaned toward me at one point. "Loretta, you okay?" she asked softly, eyes full of pity. I nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? But inside, my chest burned. Shame, sharp and bitter, twisted into something harder. I wouldn't let this be the last word. If they wanted to humiliate me, they had underestimated what I was capable of. The humiliation was fuel, and it was igniting something that had been simmering for far too long. Later that evening, as the plates were cleared and coffee poured, I felt a tug at my elbow. My father, face set in grim lines, nodded toward a side hallway. We stepped into the quiet, the murmur of voices fading behind the door. His jaw was tight, eyes narrowed. "Loretta," he began, his voice low but sharp. "If you won't pay, then don't bother showing up at the wedding." The words struck like a slap. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," he hissed. "This family has invested everything in that event. If you can't support us, don't come. We don't need your bitterness ruining his day." I stared at him, my pulse roaring in my ears. "I'm not your wallet," I said evenly. "I'm your daughter." His face reddened. "Family means sacrifice. If you can't do that, then don't call yourself family." The weight of his words cut deeper than any insult. Family identity, weaponized against me, used like a blade to carve me out of my own bloodline. I inhaled slowly, keeping my voice steady. "You're not asking me to help. You're threatening to erase me." His silence was answer enough. I stepped outside into the humid night air, trembling but refusing to show it. Cicadas hummed from the trees, the world moving on as if nothing had cracked inside me. I leaned against the stone wall, breathing deeply until my heartbeat steadied. "Silence is consent," I muttered, repeating the phrase I'd once heard in a seminar. My parents had always counted on my silence, because it made their lies easier to tell. But silence wasn't going to serve them anymore. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, scrolling through transactions. Catering, florists, deposits, all tied back to my card. One by one, I snapped screenshots. Then I lifted the phone and discreetly photographed receipts scattered on a nearby table, decorations with vendor tags still attached, everything I recognized as mine. Proof. Each click of the camera was a vow. They thought humiliation would shrink me, but it only sharpened me. Every insult, every dismissal, every lie. They weren't breaking me down. They were building my case. I walked back through the hall. my head high despite the sting that lingered. Guests were still laughing, clinking glasses, pretending not to see me. My father returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. My mother smiled for the crowd, her mask unbroken, but I knew something they didn't. They wanted me gone from the wedding, I whispered to myself. They forgot I was already in the receipts. And receipts don't lie. The bridal shower was held in a community hall that my aunt had rented, with strings of balloons and tables covered in pastel cloths. I walked in carrying a small gift bag, keeping my face calm even though my stomach turned with every step. The chatter dipped as soon as I entered. Some relatives smiled tightly, others avoided my gaze altogether. The air was thick, not with celebration, but with anticipation, like they were all in on something I hadn't been told. As I moved past the tables, I caught the sound of a whisper. She agreed already, but now she's backtracking. The words stung, and I turned my head quickly, catching two cousins leaning toward each other. One of them glanced up, color draining from her face when she realized I'd heard. I kept walking, but my mind raced. Backtracking? What agreement? I spotted my cousin Claire, the only one who had ever shown me an ounce of kindness, standing near the punch bowl. I approached her, keeping my voice low. Claire, what are they talking about? What agreement? She shifted uncomfortably, glancing around. Loretta, maybe this isn't the place. Claire, I cut in, sharper this time. Please. She sighed, pulled out her phone, and showed me a screenshot. My breath caught. It was a text message thread, my name at the top, but the words had been cut, spliced, rearranged. It looked like I had texted my mother, saying I agreed to pay for the wedding in full. I felt dizzy. This isn't real, I whispered. I know, Claire said quickly, but it's going around. People think you promised and now you're backing out. I handed her phone back, my hand trembling. They didn't just take my money, they stole my voice. The bridal shower itself was a spectacle of false praise. My mother floated from table to table, basking in compliments. My father stood tall, shaking hands, smiling with the pride of a man who believed he had built something monumental. Edie, Percy, you've outdone yourselves, one guest said loudly. This wedding is going to be unforgettable. What generosity! My mother laughed modestly, placing her hand over her heart. Oh, well, we just wanted to give Maris the wedding he deserves. The bride beamed, hugging my mother, thanking her profusely. Not a word of thanks came my way. My name wasn't mentioned once. I sat in the corner, a polite smile plastered on my face, excluded from photos, ignored during speeches. I watched as my money, my credit, my sacrifices were transformed into their applause. Inside, my hands clenched into fists under the table. I was paying for a spotlight that blinded me out. American families know this dynamic too well. How often the one who does the quiet work, who carries the weight, is erased, while others bask in recognition. Sitting there, I felt like I was living proof of that truth. I held my breath, forcing myself to appear calm, because every word out of their mouths was fuel for what I knew I had to do next. It didn't take long for someone to notice the stiffness in my posture. Loretta, why do you look so upset? An aunt asked, her voice loud enough for the room to hear. Before I could respond, my mother jumped in. Oh, don't mind her. She always gets dramatic. Laughter rippled through the room. Thin, uneasy, but loud enough to burn. My cheeks flushed hot, though I kept my eyes fixed on the tablecloth. Maris chuckled from across the room, clinking his glass against a friend's. Some things never change, he muttered. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. Each word, each laugh was like a shovel of dirt being thrown over me, burying me alive. They didn't realize I was already gathering dirt of my own, records, receipts, statements. They thought humiliation would silence me. Instead, it was sharpening me. The betrayal cut deeper than any financial theft. This was my family not only twisting my words but ridiculing me in public, turning me into the family clown for daring to resist. When the party wound down, I slipped out early, clutching my purse like it was the only anchor I had left. I sat in my car with the engine off, staring at Claire's screenshot glowing on my phone. The manipulated message, proof of just how far they were willing to go. I hit record on my phone's voice memo. Note to self, They can twist words, but paper doesn't bend. I'll build my case piece by piece. Hearing my own voice steadied me. I leaned back, inhaling slowly, letting the noise of the fading party outside wash over me. This wasn't weakness, it was strategy. They thought they had won tonight, silencing me with lies and laughter. But as I gripped the phone tighter, I knew they had made their biggest mistake. They had shown me exactly what I needed to fight them. They thought they won, I whispered, eyes on the dark road ahead. They have no idea what's coming. I drove away, headlights cutting through the night, the glow of the hall shrinking in my rearview mirror. Their laughter faded, replaced by the quiet hum of my engine. If they could fake a message, I thought, I could deliver one louder than they ever imagined. And mine wouldn't be whispered. It would be undeniable. The mail was stacked on my kitchen counter when I got home that Friday evening, most of it the usual clutter, flyers, bills, an ad for a roofing company, but one envelope stood out. The paper was heavier, the return address printed with the seal of the state of Texas. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the contents. At first, the words blurred together, my eyes scanning but refusing to accept what I was reading. Then the letters sharpened, cutting straight through me. A certificate of business registration. The company name was unfamiliar, but the line beneath it carried mine. Registered owner, Loretta Connolly. My hands shook. I hadn't registered a company. I never signed a single piece of paper. I read it again, slower this time, hunting for a mistake. But it was all there. My social security number, my address, my signature. Except it wasn't mine. I dropped into the nearest chair, the paper trembling in my hand. They didn't just steal my card. They stole my identity. My pulse raced as I booted up my laptop, the glow of the screen harsh against the darkening room. I pulled up public business records, typed in the company name. There it was again, unmistakable. My name listed as owner, the mailing address tied back to my parents' house. And under authorized agents? Maris. The betrayal had cut deeper than money. This wasn't a simple charge on my account. This was legal fraud, written into state records. They had built a company on my back without my knowledge. Identity theft ruins people's lives. I had read the stories. People losing homes, spending years fighting credit agencies, entire lives destroyed. Except in my case, it wasn't strangers behind a screen. It was my family. I sat at my desk, laptop open, surrounded by receipts and old bills I pulled from a drawer. I began connecting the dots, retracing the past few years. It wasn't just one event. It was years of small requests, money for emergencies, for repairs, for tuition, promises of repayment that never came. I spread out the papers across the table, tracing lines with a pen, drawing arrows between charges. It hit me with brutal clarity. This wasn't accidental. This was systematic. Every request had been dressed as love, every favor repackaged as duty. And I had always complied, swallowing the sting, because family takes care of family. I whispered aloud, the words tasting bitter and true. Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and forever to repair. The pain that had pressed on my chest for weeks began to morph into something else. Clarity. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had erased it. I opened an old spreadsheet file buried deep on my computer, one I had once kept as a joke. I called it the Family tab, a tongue-in-cheek list of little debts my parents and Maris had never paid back, gas money, small utilities, groceries. Now I added to it. Line after line, 2015, Maris's medical bills, $1,200. 2016, house repairs I covered, $4,000. 2018, mom's dental surgery, $3,500. 2020, dad's hearing aids, $1,300. Each year, the numbers grew heavier, the pattern clearer. Finally, I typed the last entry, 2023, Maris's wedding deposit, $89,000. I stared at the total at the bottom, a number so high it made my chest tighten. This wasn't petty bitterness, this was record-keeping, and records don't lie. I hit print. The machine roared to life, page after page sliding into the tray. By the time it stopped, a thick stack of 40 sheets sat in my hands, stapled in the corner. I lifted the weight of it, heavier than it had any right to be. This wasn't a spreadsheet anymore. It was my life in black and white, years of erosion captured on paper. Every unpaid debt, every broken promise, every theft masquerading as love. As I stacked the papers neatly, I noticed another envelope tucked among the mail I had dropped earlier. My name on the front, but the sender was the bank. I ripped it open and my breath caught. Inside was a contract tied to the company registered under my name. A loan had already been approved. Tens of thousands of dollars, signed and sealed. My name was on the dotted line, forged as if I had been standing there with pen in hand. I stared at the document, horror flooding me. If I didn't act, I could lose everything, my credit, my apartment, my future. This wasn't just about stealing money anymore. This was about shackling me to debt that wasn't mine. They weren't just borrowing my name, I whispered, my voice shaking. They were betting against my life. The fury rising in me burned hotter than fear. They had counted on me staying quiet. But now the choice was gone. My silence would cost me everything. And so, it hardened into resolve. I would strike, and I would strike before the wedding. I gathered the ledger, the fraudulent registration, and the loan contract, stacking them together on my table. I smoothed the pages flat, staring at them until my breathing steadied. My hands trembled, but my eyes were clear. They wanted me silent, I thought. Instead, I'll make them face every page of my silence. And the wedding would be the stage. The wedding day arrived with a heat that clung to Dallas like a heavy coat. I stood outside the grand venue, my reflection caught in the polished glass doors. My dress was simple but deliberate, navy blue with clean lines. In my hand, I clutched a small bag that held everything. 40 printed pages, receipts, contracts, evidence. My heart pounded, but my steps were steady as I entered. Inside, the grandeur hit me all at once. White roses cascaded over archways, chandeliers dripped crystal light, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. All of it, every flower, every sparkling glass, funded by the card in my wallet. Relatives approached in clusters, greeting me with half-hearted smiles. Some mumbled hello before turning away. Others barely acknowledged me at all, their eyes sliding past like I was a stranger. I could feel the whispers trailing behind me as I walked. She doesn't belong here. Why did she even come? I was dressed like a guest, but treated like an intruder. An usher guided me through the glittering hall toward my assigned seat. I followed, already bracing for the placement. Sure enough, I was led to a small table near the catering station, tucked against the wall where servers moved in and out with trays. The crash of dishes and the constant swing of doors framed my seat like punctuation. I sat down, smoothing my dress, my bag resting heavy on my lap. Across the room, I could see the center table, bathed in spotlight, where Maris sat glowing with pride, his fiancée beside him. My parents flanked them, their smiles wide and proud. From nearby, a guest whispered with a smirk, "Isn't that the family's daughter, sitting there, near the staff?" A soft chuckle followed. I pressed my palms together, forcing calm. Every clink of silverware was a reminder that I was their unpaid bill, not their kin. The humiliation flushed through me, but underneath it grew a sharper calm. I wasn't here to argue about where I sat. I was here to show them what they had built their celebration on. After the ceremony, the reception hall dimmed. The MC, beaming into a microphone, announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, let us take a journey through Maris's life." The room applauded. Lights lowered. The projector flickered to life. On the screen, smiling photos of Maris as a child appeared. Birthday cakes, school trophies, vacations. Slide after slide, achievement after achievement. My jaw tightened. Once again, I was erased, as if my existence had been scrubbed from history. But then the screen flickered. The slideshow stuttered, and suddenly, different images filled the wall. Bank statements, credit card transactions. Oakdale Estate, deposit $89,000. Catering charges, florists. My name listed on every line. Murmurs spread across the room. "What is this?" someone whispered loudly. More pages appeared. The 40-page ledger I had prepared. Years of transactions, stacked debts, unreturned promises, dates, amounts, notes, all mine, all unpaid. Gasps rose, the whispers swelling into a stunned silence. I didn't move from my seat. My hands rested lightly on my bag. My heart thundered, but my face remained calm. I didn't need to shout. The numbers spoke for me. The room turned restless. Guests shifted, eyes darting between the screen and the head table. I caught the bride's face first, her skin pale, her smile frozen. Maris fumbled, scrambling toward the MC, barking orders to shut it off. The MC tapped at the laptop, panic rising, but the slides rolled on, unstoppable. My mother half rose from her chair, her voice sharp. "Turn it off! This is nonsense!" But it was too late. $89,000, someone muttered. In her name? Another voice followed. Relatives stared, shocked, murmuring louder. The truth had already burned into every mind in that hall. My father stood stiffly, trying to maintain control. "Family affairs should stay private," he said loudly, but his words only hung there, weak against the glow of numbers projected in front of hundreds. I stayed seated, calm, watching them unravel, just as they had intended for me. The humiliation no longer belonged to me. It had turned, flipped back, shining on them. The spotlight that once flattered now revealed. The slides ended abruptly. The projector cut, but the silence that followed was louder than any music. Guests whispered, some shaking their heads, others glaring at my parents. The bride buried her face in her hands, Maris hovering helplessly beside her. I rose slowly, pushing my chair back. The sound echoed through the quiet hall. I walked toward the grand doors at the far end, my bag still clutched in my hand. No one stopped me. For once I wasn't leaving in shame. I was leaving with silence loud enough to echo, and that echo would follow them long after the music stopped. The hall was still frozen in the stunned silence left behind after the slideshow ended. I remained seated at my small table, watching the ripple spread. Whispers darted from one corner to another, sharp phrases breaking the air. 89,000? In her name? That can't be right. Then why was her name on every page? The bride tried to compose herself, her face stiff as she rose and clutched the microphone. Her voice wavered but forced a smile. "Thank you everyone for being here. We're grateful to the family for supporting us so generously. This day is about love, about new beginnings." Her words were meant to restore control, but no one clapped. No one cheered. I stayed quiet, my hands resting on the folder in my lap. For once, silence wasn't my cage. It was their sentence. Dessert was supposed to soften the edges of the evening. Guests began to move toward the buffet tables, trying to carry on, until an older guest raised his glass and called out warmly to the bride. "You've married into a very generous family. You're lucky." The bride, overwhelmed, blurted out the truth that sealed everything. "Oh, we're so grateful Loretta paid for everything." It slipped out like water bursting from a cracked dam. Gasps erupted. The room turned toward me. My parents' faces drained of color. My mother's hand shot up as if she could pull the words back out of the air. My father muttered something under his breath, his jaw set tight. Maris's eyes widened with fury, and he hissed at his new wife. "What are you doing? Stop talking." But it was too late. Guests leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. "So it was her? Then why did Edie take all the credit? This whole time?" A cousin shook her head, glaring at my parents. Unbelievable. I sat still, calm, watching as the castle they built on my name began to crumble. They built their castle on my name, and now the queen gave it away. In America, weddings are about more than love. They're about prestige. And here, prestige was unraveling, one whispered realization at a time. Later, after the cake was cut and most of the crowd had thinned, my cousin Claire found me in the back corridor. Her eyes darted nervously as she pressed a small USB into my hand. "Loretta, I think you should see this. It's the original slideshow file." I raised an eyebrow. "Why are you giving this to me?" "Because I saw what they did," she whispered. "I knew it wasn't right. Just look at it." I carried the USB into a small side room where a laptop had been left open for staff. Sliding it in, I clicked the file. The slideshow began again. Family vacations, birthdays, Maris's trophies. But this time, I noticed the jagged edges around the photos, the clumsy cuts. I leaned closer, my breath shallow. In one picture, a birthday cake glowed with candles. I remembered that night. I had been sitting right next to Maris, smiling, hands folded neatly in front of me. But in this photo, my space was empty. My image had been cropped away. Another slide. Christmas morning. I remembered the sweater I had worn, red with white trim. In the doctored version, the edge of the sweater was still visible at the side of the frame, but the rest of me was gone. They didn't just erase me from the future, I whispered. They rewrote the past. Rage rose in me, but it was cold, controlled. The photos weren't just lies. They were an attack on memory itself. Symbolism so clear it was almost laughable. Photos as weapons, false history curated to glorify Maris and bury me. History is fragile when truth has scissors, I murmured. Grief swept through me for the child I had been, for the girl cropped out of her own birthday, her own Christmas. But anger burned hotter now for the woman they thought they could still erase. When I returned to the hall, the atmosphere had shifted entirely. Conversations were no longer hushed. They were pointed. Relatives avoided my parents, giving them cold stares or turning their backs. Guests who once circled Maris drifted away, their curiosity satisfied, their loyalty shaken. I walked slowly, deliberately, through the room. I didn't move a muscle more than necessary, but the floor beneath them shifted anyway. My parents sat at the head table, isolated, their smiles gone. Maris leaned into his bride, whispering furiously, but she stared ahead, her face pale. Symbolic power had turned. For years, I had been invisible in rooms like these, tucked at the edges. Now, without saying a word, I was central. My silence wasn't absence anymore. It was presence that crushed theirs. Several relatives approached me quietly, one by one. Aunt Margaret touched my arm and said softly, "Loretta, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it sooner." Uncle Mark shook his head. "I believed them. I didn't want to think they could do that to you. I was wrong." Others looked ashamed, unwilling to meet my eyes, embarrassed by their complicity. I gave each one a small nod. No anger, no forgiveness, just acknowledgement. As the evening drew to a close, I moved past my parents' table. Neither of them met my eyes. My father stared into his glass. My mother fiddled with her napkin as though it might save her. They erased me to make him the pride, I thought. But pride built on theft crumbles fast. And their crumble had only just begun. The familiar streets stretched out before me, each turn echoing memories of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else. Neighbors' porches still had the same swing sets, the same trimmed hedges, the same holiday decorations hanging stubbornly even in off-seasons. Nothing had changed, and yet everything inside me had. As I turned into my parents' subdivision, a wave of exhaustion swept over me, heavier than the steering wheel I gripped. The house came into view, porch light glowing against the early evening dark. Through the curtains, I saw shadows of people moving, heard faint laughter slipping through cracks in the windows. From the outside, it looked like warmth. To me, it felt foreign, hostile, like a stranger's home. "I grew up here," I whispered to myself, pulling into the driveway, but it never grew around me. Walking up the path was like carrying decades of betrayal on my shoulders. Each step cracked open memories I had worked so hard to bury, times when my voice was drowned out, when my needs were brushed aside, when silence was demanded of me. The front door, familiar yet suffocating, waited at the top of the steps, and in my pocket was the key that had once symbolized safety, but now burned like cold iron against my leg. I reached into my pocket and pulled the key out. The metal felt heavier than it should have. Its edges pressed into my palm, and with it came memories. Standing outside that very door as a teenager, locked out because I'd missed curfew by 20 minutes. Hearing my father's voice through the wood, stern and unyielding. Our rules or no key. The sting of being told this house wasn't truly mine unless I bent myself to fit their version of loyalty. Looking down at the key, I realized it had never opened belonging. It had only ever opened obligation. I knelt down, the concrete cool beneath me, and placed the key on the welcome mat. I straightened it carefully, aligning it with the edge of the door frame, not out of respect, but out of control. This was my way of ending things, not with yelling, not with one final explosion, but with precision. As I stood, a quiet narration formed in my mind. This gesture is louder than any confrontation. It was goodbye, without the hope of reconciliation, the final punctuation to a sentence I never wanted to write but had been forced to live. I turned, ready to leave, when the door creaked open behind me. "Loretta?" My mother's voice carried surprise, then suspicion. She stood framed in the doorway, her hand clutching the knob. "What are you doing here?" I straightened, meeting her eyes. "Leaving something behind." She glanced down, saw the key on the mat, and frowned. "You don't have to be so dramatic. We're still family." The words burned, but I answered with clarity. Family doesn't sign your name on debt. Family doesn't erase you from their story. Her face hardened. "You're twisting this. We've given you everything. We carried you. And now, when it's your turn..." "It was never my turn," I cut in. My voice was low but steady. "It was always his, and you made sure of that." My father appeared behind her, shoulders square, voice sharp. "You think you're above sacrifice? Family means putting others before yourself. If you can't, then maybe you're not family." I inhaled, letting the words settle before I answered. "You already had your chance to prove what family means. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to end it." They stared at me, waiting for more, but I gave them nothing. Breaking free didn't need shouting. Strength sometimes lived in silence that refused to bend. I walked back down the path, each step lighter than the one before. My chest loosened with every footfall, as though the key I left behind had been pulling me down for years. From the porch, I heard muffled voices, my father grumbling, my mother whispering urgently, but I didn't turn back. The street stretched before me, empty and calm. I slid into my car, turned the engine, and let the hum fill the silence. No music, no distractions, just the sound of tires carrying me away from a bond that had rotted long ago. They thought silence was surrender, I reflected as the streetlights flickered past. They never understood silence could also be victory. I drove without rush, letting the separation widen with every mile. The house receded into the distance, a place I once called home, but now only recognized as a site of loss and manipulation. Back at my apartment complex, I parked and killed the engine. The night was quiet, the air cooler here, gentler. I sat for a long time staring at the empty passenger seat, the absence beside me loud in its own way. I gave them my silence for years, I thought. Now I'm giving it to myself, as peace. And in that peace, I began to imagine a new name. In the days that followed the wedding, I noticed the shift not just in my own chest, but in the way people looked at me and looked at them. Shame spreads quickly in a close-knit community, and my parents had always thrived on being the respectable couple, the family to admire. Now, whispers floated through grocery aisles, murmurs trailed at church. A neighbor leaned toward another and said, "Can you believe it? All in her name." I walked past them without flinching. For years I carried the shame like a scarlet letter, believing silence made me complicit. Now, it was theirs to carry. For once, the burden wasn't strapped to my shoulders. They could no longer hide behind polished smiles or well-rehearsed stories. The community had seen the ledger, seen the proof. For me, the realization came quietly, like exhaling after holding my breath too long. For years I carried the shame. Now it was finally theirs to hold. I sat alone in my apartment one evening, the sounds of laughter and television seeping through thin walls from neighboring homes. The stack of documents, my ledger, the fake contracts, the forged registrations, sat neatly filed in a box by the couch. I no longer needed to look at them. Their weight was real, but it was no longer crushing me. The courthouse smelled of dust and floor polish when I walked in a few mornings later, papers clutched in my hand. Petition for a legal name change. The metal detector beeped as I stepped through, and the security guard nodded me on. The benches were cold, the air heavy with the hush of bureaucracy. My heels clicked on the tiled floor as I approached the clerk's desk. A woman behind the glass glanced up, her expression neutral. "What are you here for?" she asked. I slid the papers through the slot. "Petition to change my legal name," she leafed through, nodding. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I met her eyes, steady. "I've never been more sure." She stamped the paper with a thud that echoed in my chest. The sound was final, yet freeing. As I stood there, I thought of all the times my name had been twisted. The forged contracts, the fake company, the slideshow where I had been cropped out, the countless family dinners where my name wasn't spoken with pride, but wielded like an afterthought. Names are chains or wings, I thought. I chose wings. I walked out of that courthouse lighter than I had felt in decades. They were waiting for me outside. My mother stood stiffly, hands clasped, eyes watery. My father beside her, arms crossed, face lined with anger he couldn't mask. "Loretta," my mother said, stepping forward. "You don't mean this. You're upset. We're still family." I stopped a few feet away, my papers clutched in my hand. My voice was calm. "Family doesn't steal your future. Family doesn't erase you from the past. You lost the right to my name the moment you signed it away." Her lips trembled. "We did what we had to do for Maris. He needed us." "No," I interrupted softly but firmly. "You needed me, and you used me. That's not family." My father's voice was low, tight. "You'll regret this. Blood is blood." I looked him in the eye. "Blood might bind us, but integrity defines us, and you've shown me what yours is worth." Their silence was answer enough. I walked past them, not pausing, not turning. The grief that had anchored me for so long loosened with each step. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Back at my apartment, a small package waited in the mailbox. I carried it upstairs, set it on the desk, and opened it carefully. Inside lay a nameplate, shiny, new, engraved with letters that no longer carried theirs. I traced the grooves with my fingertips. It wasn't the name my parents gave me. It was the name I gave myself. On the wall, sunlight filtered through blinds, painting soft stripes across the desk. I placed the plate down, centering it carefully, smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. "Sometimes you have to let go of the life you thought you'd have," I whispered, recalling words I'd once heard, "to make room for the life you deserve." This was my life, my room, my name. 1 week later, I strolled through a park near my apartment. Children chased one another across the grass, parents chatted by benches, couples shared ice cream cones. The sound of laughter rippled through the air, light and unburdened. I paused on a path, watching a little girl twirl with a paper crown on her head. Her parents clapped, cheering her on as if she were royalty. I smiled, not bitter, not longing, but at peace. I didn't need my parents' recognition anymore. I didn't need their apologies or their approval. I wasn't ungrateful. I was unowned. And finally, I was free. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in years, I breathed without weight on my chest. My parents had given me silence. I turned it into a voice, and that voice was mine to keep.